My name is Hanne Bess Boelsbjerg, and I thank you for the opportunity to share our work on training presence among the dying, drawing on insights from a project in which we evaluated the training of mindfulness and compassion among hospice care staff at 4 hospices in Denmark. The objective for initiating this training and evaluation with both qualitative and quantitative methods was to see if the training could help the hospice care staff to prevent emotional burnout, or compassion fatigue as it's called. The stressors for these conditions are normally related to being exposed to extended periods of suffering during patients' dying process. Being partly a medical anthropological project and an intervention study within the realm of palliative care, we hypothesized that training the ability to stay present and kind in the midst of suffering would enhance the hospice care staff's ability to overcome the feeling of disempowerment when facing suffering one could not relieve. But precisely defining presence is difficult. Leaving out accounts of dictionaries and scholarly definitions, I will repeat a simple quote by Lacalana, who is depicted to the left. Attending to one of his teachings, at which somebody asked him about how to know whether one was present, he gladly exclaimed, "Is there somebody here who's not present?" Playing with words, this sentence shows the paradoxical nature of presence. First, by hinting to presence as a prerequisite for physically being together. Next, as a joking remark about whether one was attending to his teaching. Presence, in this immediate understanding, is the condition for being able to experience something, partly by embodying the experience and attending to it. To stay within the realm of meditation, another way to encircle what it means to be present is to look at the relationship between presence and experience. In a paper from 2021, the founder of microphenomenology, Claire Petit-Magan, describes the characteristics of staying attentive to experience as it is, as the goal of meditation. I quote, "Meditating is training oneself," the Sanskrit text says, "to seeing what is there, namely to recognize what we are living instant after instant." Hereby, she is pointing to the importance of presentifying oneself to what one is experiencing. She continues to list the 4 main domain, or rather processes, that hinder one in remaining present with the unfolding of one's experience. Petit-Magan describes this as 4 main types of wheels, namely an attentional, emotional, intentional, and cognitive wheel. The attentional wheel relates to mind wandering, the emotional to avoiding unpleasantness, the intentional to cling to nice experience, for instance, by recalling them, and the cognitive wheel to the separation of oneself from one's experience. We will return shortly to these domains that prevent one in being attentive to or present with the experience as it is when learning about how the hospice care staff train mindfulness and compassion. But first, this tentative understanding of presence as an embodied attention to the process of experiencing needs to be bridged to the work with dying people on an everyday basis. Therefore, I will shortly introduce you to the hospice care setting. This picture depicts one of the 19 hospices for adults placed mostly at beautiful sites in Denmark. It is part of the self-understanding of the hospice movement, which really established itself in Denmark around 1992 with the first hospice opening, that the aesthetics of the surroundings and the interior are important features of taking care of the dying and their relatives. In addition to that, giving time to care for the whole being of the dying and their relatives has been of highest priority. This means that the hospice care staff has been trained to discover different kinds of suffering, related to the life dimensions, which can be divided into the physical, the psychological, the social, and the existential and spiritual realm. The hospice care staff therefore supports an articulation of needs related to those areas to relieve what is termed as the total pain of the patient, which is a concept initiated by the founder of the modern hospice care movement, Dame Cicely Saunders. To exemplify how the hospice care staff use themselves in their work with the dying and their relatives, I will introduce or include a short excerpt from the movie we made in relation to our project. Here, one of the main or leading nurses of the hospice explains how she experiences that the staff are kind of scanning others' needs to be able to help them in the best possible way. I'm sorry, I slipped that one.
Så det at være sygeplejerske på hospice er jo krævende på den måde, at man hele tiden sådan prøver på at scanne patienter og pårørende for, hvilke behov de har. Så man er hele tiden sådan meget ude i andre mennesker, hvis man skal være en dygtig palliationssygeplejerske, som skal finde ud af, hvad er det for en pleje og omsorg, der skal til her, for at de mennesker kan have det så godt som overhovedet muligt.
In the study, we wanted to explore what exactly was perceived as stressful when working with the dying and how the training might enhance their ability to handle this stress by staying present and kind. Besides the questionnaires delivered pre and post training, we used several qualitative methods on the 4 hospices, which are marked by a star on the map of Denmark. Out of the 44 participants, 18 were interviewed before the training and halfway through. All participants were invited to contribute to the focus group interviews, but due to planning of working schedules and holidays, only 34 participated post-training. As a qualitative researcher, I conducted participatory field work during the first time of training with each group, and then the 5th and the last one. Through the different kinds of material, we are able to draw a picture of how the training of presence took place on an individual level, among peers, and in relation to working with the dying and the relatives. But before giving you empirical examples, a brief introduction to the training program is needed. So the training consisted of the evidence-based training program called MBSR, or mindfulness-based stress reduction, combined with extra exercises focusing on compassion. The training took place over 8 weeks with a weekly meeting of 3 hours. The meeting comprised teaching exercises, both meditation exercises and psychoeducative tasks, as well as meditating together and sharing experiences. In between these meetings, the participants were expected to train mindfulness and compassion on their own by listening to recorded guided meditations by the 2 instructors attending each group. When explaining what mindfulness is to the participants, one of the instructors says, "Mindfulness is mental training and a training in knowing your own body and mind, but it is as much heart training, training in kindness, as mental training. Thus, although we added some extra compassion exercises, the MBSR program in itself contains training kindness and compassion towards oneself and others." Exercises included focusing on breathing. This was either done formally through a guided meditation, where the practice consists of returning with one's awareness to the breath by either feeling the area around the nostrils or how the chest or belly rise and fall with each breath. But it was also encouraged to practice an awareness on one's breathing when out of the meditation setting. One of the instructors explained how the breath relates to presence on the very first day of training, after having introduced the group to a guided meditation on breathing. You don't have to focus on the problem. There's a lot of work in being present. It's a technique, a focus on the breath. For instance, when we are in a queue in the supermarket or we get stuck in a traffic jam, we can be challenged by different things. And this is where we can use our awareness of the breath to come back to the present moment. Another technique used for training the hospice care staff in staying present is a so-called body scan. From field notes follows the first part of the body scan given at the 5th time of the training. The focus on bodily sensation is established by a guided tour starting from the toes and then the rest of the body. Feel your toes. No, feel your body. Breathe. Feel all the toes. All 10 toes. The big toes, middle toes, and little toes. Feel whether they are hot or cold. Feel the space between the toes. Feel the soles and pads on both feet, the arch, the heels, and then feel the contact with the mat. Feel the top of both feet at once. Take a deep breath from both feet and letting go. Staying closely attentive to these specific body areas for either 15 or 45 minutes enables the participant to become present in an embodied way. They train the ability to focus on the shifts in the process, like when being guided in the other meditations, which are part of the training. The body scan is supplied with mindful yoga, where attention is also guided to be close to the body and its movements. Lastly, the MBSR training program also includes education in psychological reactions to stress and offers exercises enabling the participants to explore experiences that were uncomfortable or stressful in a manner providing them with insights about their mental, emotional, and physiological reactions to the stress they perceived. This enhances the chance of learning to recognize when something is perceived as stressful by being aware of the way the body-mind reacts in certain situations. And this was exemplified by this STOP model, which consists of different steps. This leads to mentioning one of the most prominent stressors when working with dying people. This excerpt from the movie will speak for itself.
Når du udskriver en patient fra et hospital, så kan du godt sige, at det har været et forfærdeligt ophold, og de har ikke fået det ud af det, de ville, eller det der brækkede ben er godt nok blevet sat sammen, men det er ikke blevet helt så godt. Jamen, der er altid noget, man kan sige, jamen det kan være, at du skal tilbage igen. Man kan ikke sige til en hospice-patient, når vi håber, det bliver bedre næste gang. Du har den her ene gang til at gøre det godt. Og det er måske der, hvor den største pres bliver. At jeg tænker, jeg kan ikke gå på kompromis med noget som helst.
There were a lot of testimonies on how the different stressors related to work and private life can end up making the hospice care staff feel unable to care sufficiently for the dying, at least in regard to their own standards. One of the participants expressed this distress in an individual interview halfway through the training. I've been able to feel a special kind of presence from the first day I started working at hospice, but I have noticed that it has been missing for at least 5 to 6 years. Later in the same interview, she continues, when it dawned to me during the training that I had actually been stressed, I was very sad and cried a lot because it is a kind of a taboo for me that I can't handle everything. There is a sense of absence related to being overwhelmed by the different tasks, emotions, or confrontations with suffering, which is part of their everyday working life conditions. The transformation of this into presence is facilitated by practicing the different elements from the training. This can happen at home, in the group, or at encounters at work with the dying and the relatives. Through practicing these different qualities, like mentioned here, staying attentive, accepting, being kind, and letting go, they are able to transform what is perceived as a sort of absence into a presence that is described as returning home. Now, we take a closer look on how this transformation can take place individually, like at home, among peers, like in the group, and together with the dying at work. To illustrate how the transformation of presence could take place in relation to the participants practicing at home, I bring you an excerpt from an individual interview halfway through the training program. The other day, my dog ran away out in the woods and was gone for 20 minutes. At first, I got these heart palpitations and thought, oh shit, How shall I tell my kids? I almost had the dog buried. Then all of a sudden I realized it's just your thoughts. The dog is in the woods. Now you just have to breathe and calm down. It was simply so good because that's how it is. My thoughts simply ran away and I got scared and panicked. So the fact that I was actually managed to take it completely calmly in such a situation was really amazing. You might recognize the elements from the training, namely that she's using her awareness to notice her reactions and then returning to her breath, which facilitates a sense of being present, described as being calm in a stressful situation. In the training sessions with the group, the instructors would often facilitate an exploration of an experience to create an opportunity to stay attentive to what was exactly unfolding. The experience could stem from something shared in the group when reflecting on the learnings in between the group meetings, or from a meditation that was just guided and then reflected upon. In such a situation, halfway through the training, one of the participants shared her discovery of how it is like to include something that is happening in the body by being guided to listening to the surrounding sounds. As there was some unpleasantness involved in the bodily sensations, the instructor asks, what was it like to be conscious or guided to something that was not pleasant? Because it obviously wasn't. The participant says, well, yes, it was interesting. I was guided to something that I was not aware of. And if you have to be whole, you have to be with it as well, she laughs. These guided explorations are respectfully trying to support the participants in exploring what is unfolding in their experience, also encouraging them to stay attentive to what is described as the wounded place if it occurs. Here the anticipation is that by daring to be present in relation to one's own suffering, the tendency to run away from the suffering witnessed in others will lessen simply by recognizing it for what it is. In relation to training or practicing one's presence at work, several mentions that connecting to the breath help themselves and their surroundings, both the dying and their relatives, by reconnecting them to their own breathing. Sometimes they even lay a hand on the belly and ask to breathe down to where the dying person feels the hand. The hospice care staff already knows the importance of breathing to create calmness, but they gained a greater awareness of this practice during the training. Due to their many practical chores during their working day, finding time for practicing a longer period of meditation during work almost seemed impossible, but an occasion occurred which was shared midway through the training with the rest of the group. Yesterday, I had a woman in the hot tub here at the hospice, and I always enjoyed that. It took a long time, so I sat down and then I meditated. I thought there are others who probably will take over what I should have done otherwise. So I took my time as I could feel that I was disturbing the woman when focusing on practical chores. And this woman is actually or usually someone who is hard to help, who cannot do much to relieve her pain. She's also someone who seems very spiritual. Later, she came back to me and said it had been a profound experience for her, and it was for me as well. Allowing herself to attend to her own presence seemingly enhanced the ability of the woman to stay present to her experience as well. With this notion, I would like to wind up this presentation with offering the concept of sharing presence and try to relate this to the initial reflections around the supports, how to support one in being present. In a way, hospice is a special setting for training presence, as it is exactly this very presence which is believed to disappear when you die. The empirical examples show that the hospice care staff are aware of the importance of staying present and accept the suffering they might not be able to relieve. At the same time, this tends to create suffering as they often perceive this as personal shortcomings. Through the training, they learn to identify the tension they have against experiencing what is. And they learn that by staying attentive to the experience and allowing or accepting whatever arises with the intention of letting the different features of the experience go, then they can remain in an embodied presence. The techniques that the participants learn when training to stay present and relate to the domains described by Petit Magan. To recall this, she speaks of attentional, emotional, intentional, and cognitive views which are hindering one in being present while the experience unfolds. As a concluding remark, presence seems to be enhanced by the intentional interaction with others, either capable of staying present or striving for it. Therefore, sharing presence might be another way of speaking about training presence or rediscovering it. But as this study took place in the context of mindfulness and compassion training, the term presence might be interchangeable with concepts like attention, experiencing, or being conscious. This is up for discussion and might be highlighted by listening to the other papers. And just before finishing the presentation, I would like to acknowledge the instructors from the training, where two are depicted here in the pictures, and my colleagues from the Danish Center for Mindfulness at the Aarhus University, and also acknowledge the funding for this project from the Bellevue Foundation, and thank you all and the collaborators for taking part in this.